618 years pass, an entire era of silence passes through time. The island, almost completely unrecognizable to what it once was, has been quiet for over 6 centuries. Back in the year 2213, 624 years ago, there was a cruise ship on the island of Zephyr. This ship was filled with supplies and people to sail away in an attempt to escape the Mansion people's control over the island. The ship's escape was entirely a success, but one day the entire sea suddenly disappeared, like it was teleported away. The ship fell and crashed on what used to be the ocean floor. The people on the ship crawled out of the wreck, only to be met with barren lands beyond what the eye could see. They were completely stranded in the middle of the dead ocean. The people from the cruise ship created a society amongst the dead ocean. These boat people created a civilization out of scraps from the ship. This society was forced to survive off the rations packed onto the ship. Eventually, there was no more hope left for the boat people. They had almost entirely run out of food and water, leaving them left with only one option: to die. One man stepped up above the rest. He was hopeful, but not unrealistic. Anywhere they would go would lead to more wasteland, and staying by the crashed boat would only lead them to inevitable starvation and death. He believed the only way they could persist would be in the future, far past the present day. The future, where the Mansion people will hopefully cease to exist, and where the dead ocean will become full again. A future far from their reach, unless they were able to have someone wait. A robot built from scraps of the ship, capable of surviving centuries in the future. The robot could carry Zephian DNA and grow new Zephians in this future with growing chambers. The robot was constructed and set to remain dormant and underground for centuries, only to be awakened to return to the island of Zephyr and rebirth the Zephian people. The day came, 624 years after the Zephian robot was buried underground, and 618 years after the extinction of Kradons and Zephians. By mere accident, the Zephian race was brought back to existence. The Zephian robot woke, digging itself out of the ground it was buried in. It was now deep underwater. The dead ocean was now completely full of water once more. The robot would travel back to the island on the bottom of the ocean. Days pass, and the robot finally makes it to the island. The island is now completely new for the robot, along with the Zephian DNA it stored. This new beginning for the Zephians would never know of the extensive past for the now extinct Kradons and previous Zephians. In the south end of the island, one of very few remnants from Zephian past remains. This place used to be known as the Southern Laboratory, which was a laboratory created by the Mansion people and John Carter. The Zephian robot chose to reside at this location. Since the place used to be a laboratory, the interior was already equipped with scientific tools that would prove useful for the construction of the base, along with the growing chambers needed to repopulate the Zephian race. A year passes. The Zephian robot successfully created growing chambers loaded with Zephian DNA to bring back the species from extinction. The only last thing that needed to be done was to construct a massive wall around the town. During the past 618 years on the island, the monstrosities have been the apex predator. They had been slowly growing smarter and stronger with time. Hordes of monstrosities covered the island, and the Zephians would easily all perish without any defenses against the monstrosities. 20-foot walls were erected around the town, keeping the monstrosities out and the people in. More time passes, and the society has now thrived. With roughly 150 people populating the small town, the future held hope. Expansions were made to the wall surrounding the civilization. They would do this by having soldiers go on the other side of the wall and fend off monstrosities, while others would construct a new wall farther out. Once the new one was completely constructed, they would take down the old wall, and thus expand their territory. The process of expanding the wall was extremely dangerous and resulted in numerous deaths, but the Zephians had no other choice but to further enlarge their territory. The population within the walls was becoming more civilized each day. Laws and rules were being made and regulated, while the rulers were kept from becoming too corrupt. Buildings such as churches and schools were being built around the town. New establishments such as blacksmiths, armories, and weaponries were being constructed day by day. The Zephian robot that brought the Zephian race back to existence was slowly running out of power. His final days were upon him, and so he was preserved in a high-security museum after his passing. Nine years passed, and the wall kept expanding onwards. The people expand their territory into a strange geological wonder of land. The ground was purple and crystalline, glimmering brightly in the light. The people came across outcrops of deep purple and black ore. They researched it to find extreme energy signatures from it. From this fascinating discovery, new technologies arose. Industries were built across the lands within the wall. Steamboats were set sail over the sea just next to the city. Explorations were made, and although dangerous, they brought back many discoveries about the island. The wall was also upgraded and built to withstand even the strongest attacks from monstrosities. Compared to the other walls that would need constant repairs and renovations, the new thick wall would rarely need care, if at all. A group of Zephians board a steamboat to travel far and to start another expansion project in the western end of the island. The Zephians advanced technology quicker than any civilization ever has. With the help of the ancient southern laboratory and the powerful energy source from the purple crystal biome, technological innovations were extremely easy for Zephians. What used to be the steamboats were now massive ships nearly the size of a town. These were out at sea, coming back for supplies if needed. These ships would also sail to the new western city to deliver supplies or drop off new residents for the city. Cars and other vehicles were developed, leading to the construction of roads between buildings. But with all the new advancements, the purple crystal-like land was completely depleted of its energy. Luckily, by this point, it didn't really matter since the civilization already developed a sustainable energy source and system. The modern age of society has come for Zephians, but they had competitors, the monstrosities. The people on the island knew that the monstrosities were becoming cramped with how much territory they were taking from them. They knew that the monstrosities were not going down without a fight. A man by the name of Biggie Slosh stepped up. He had much knowledge on fighting and decided to start proper development for a Zephian military. A military started to form, with weapons, tanks, and other destructive equipment being innovated to be used against the powerful forces of the monstrosities. A decade passes. The boundaries of the people's territories expand far beyond what anyone has ever seen. The monstrosities on the other side of the walls have become more violent than ever because of this. The monstrosities would attack the wall often, but no major damage would ever occur from these events. Large ships were built, equipped with some of the most top-of-the-line weapons and fortifications. 3 minor ships and 1 massive major ship. All but one of the minor ships would be located on the docks built out at sea. The ships would be used to patrol the lands, but also to transport people and supplies. Old relics from a past civilization were also discovered during the expansion of the wall, one of which was an extremely decayed statue of what the people assumed to be a pufferfish. The structure was odd, leaving the people to assume its purpose would be forever unknown, though historians believe it was most likely a statue of a godlike idol for the ancient civilization of the past. The population of the Zephians was larger than ever, standing at about 520,000 people living on the island. Along with this, the military for the people was completely prepared and ready to combat the powerful monstrosity forces. Suddenly, the monstrosities all collectively became more furious than they ever had. They all charged towards the north end of the largest wall on the island and started to destroy the wall with their sheer brutal force. The monstrosities were all much smarter than the people had thought. They all planned to ambush one section of the wall to create a weak point against their enemies. The people had to act fast. Biggie Slosh, also referred to as General Slosh, gathered his soldiers for the battle. General S commanded his people into battle, and thus the war between the people and the monstrosities had begun. The battle took place just north of the major wall, fires ablaze as gunshots echoed. Most soldiers would camp on top of the wall to fight back, though many others had to be on the field face to face with the monstrosities. If everyone was on the wall, there would be no other distraction to slow the monstrosities, and thus they would breach through the major wall much faster. The fight was fairly quick, with minimal casualties for the people. The monstrosities lost this battle, but the war was not yet over. The monstrosities were diligent with their fighting. Many sacrificed themselves just to break through the wall even a little bit. The wall suffered heavy damages to it, making it extremely vulnerable to any more attacks. For this reason, many soldiers would camp out by this weak spot just in case repairs started to be made. Entirely separate from what was currently happening with the war, scientists noticed something in the southwest peninsula of the island. What once was an inactive volcano started to show signs of activity. It erupted not long after the initial detection of activity, and fortunately caused little to no damage whatsoever. All of a sudden, the monstrosities charged towards the weak spot of the wall. Soldiers climbed on top of the major wall to fight back, until they noticed something. They looked over the lands. Monstrosities covered every bit of the ground all the way to the horizon. The original ambush they made included about 3,500 monstrosities, but this ambush seemed to have over 15,000 of them. All rushing at once, they broke through the wall extremely fast. Monstrosities flooded into the city, with many taking down the wall to the western city on the island. People were running for their lives and soldiers were fighting back as hard as they could. In just a few minutes, the monstrosities had demolished the only thing keeping the people safe from them. General S commanded his army into battle, giving the monstrosities all they had. The fights were brutal and the casualties were overwhelming, but the fighting had to continue or the Zephian race would once again go extinct. The monstrosities were incredibly strong, and without a wall to protect the people, there was no possible way for them to fight back and win. Over the 600 years that these monsters ruled the island, they grew stronger and more powerful than ever, giving them an unstoppable strength against the Zephians. Suddenly, the west wall was breached by more monstrosities, instantly crowding the city behind the wall. The people were losing and they knew it. General S had to resort to desperate measures now. Monstrosities were slaughtering people left and right. Everyone was running for their lives as the soldiers were fighting back, and perishing for the very survival of the Zephian race. Just then, sirens went off all across the island. The people ran to the bunkers to hide from what was to come. Missiles launched off from the hidden silos afar. Barrages of rockets spread across the island, striking every area with the most monstrosities. Instantly, the monstrosity population plummeted, but this came at the cost of the city's destruction. Radiation lingered, rendering the areas uninhabitable for the moment. General S ordered a final push for the military to corner the monstrosities. With the monstrosities' numbers being so few, the rest of the population was successfully pushed and cornered into one spot on the island. But with all the monstrosities in one area, they began to attack back at one point, ripping through the people in their way. They were nearly about to break free from being surrounded. Suddenly, the last and largest ship the people had left from the war charged towards where the monstrosities were. Without hesitation, the ship pummeled into the side of the island, finishing off every last monstrosity in one massive blow. The Zephians had won the brutal war, making monstrosities finally extinct and leaving no need for a wall to protect the people. The people are left to clean up the rubble and wait for the radiation to clear in many areas. Destruction from the walls has started, allowing for the materials from the process to be repurposed to rebuild the city. General Slosh resigned from his position to become Biggie Slosh once again. Big S had only one issue from being victorious in the war. He had no purpose. With monstrosities finally being defeated, there was nothing else to give purpose to his life. To save his mental state, he took up rapping, since he had always been very good at it. In the south end of the island, where the city still survives, he would perform concerts. Biggie Slosh performs concert after concert, yet he still wasn't becoming satisfied. In fact, he was feeling more pointless by the day. His mental state was on the verge of utter breakdown. 3 years have passed. The island seems to be entirely recovered from the war. The city was bustling along with many new buildings. The Zephian Museum was located on the east coast, just north of Lake Azul. There was now a cliffside town, along with the military base located on the south coast, and Moonshine Mansion on the end of the peninsula. Whistled Wasteland was the only place on the island with irreversible damage. The desert landscape formed from the immense bombing that took place in the area just 3 years prior. The land became so dry due to the poor quality of the soil that was originally in that area. Scientists discovered more activity from the volcano on the end of the peninsula. It was unknown exactly when it would erupt. Suddenly, banks from all over the city lost their money. Some organization had been robbing these banks, but why? Investigators began a search over the island to find the person behind all of this. The investigators find the culprit, Biggie Slosh. He had organized bank robberies from all over the city, but he'd never planned to keep any of the robberies' profits. He simply just wanted to destroy the structure of the city in an attempt to revert everyone back to old savage ways. If every man was for himself, then maybe Biggie Slosh could rise among the ruins of society and become king, giving him a purpose finally worth living for. Biggie Slosh goes into hiding, completely invisible to civilization. A new military base was constructed in the East Grasslands, hopefully aiding in the search of Biggie Slosh. Along with this new base, other smaller bases were constructed in the West Grasslands. Boats were sent to sail around to survey the island. The hunt for Biggie Slosh was more than just to serve justice. It was for the very safety of the island. Biggie Slosh was immensely rich and powerful, and with his broken mental state, he could be up to anything. The island was in danger, leaving people restless at times from the fear that Biggie Slosh could attack at any moment. The only other things that change on the island are the new building next to the Moonshine Mansion and the southern cliffside town becoming abandoned and cleaned up. Suddenly, after nearly a month of searching, Biggie Slosh is spotted inside the city. The sighting was reported instantly. Biggie Slosh has completely lost his mind. He jumps in his car, the Sloshmobile, and bolts away from the cops and military. Biggie Slosh drives through the streets of the city, drifting at every turn. Abruptly, another car drifts right next to him, almost taking him out. Its name was Span-R, standing for Super Preeminent Artificial Non-Organic Robot. The car drives closer and closer to the Sloshmobile. The two cars fly through the city, dodging obstacles and taking sharp turns. They both reach speeds of nearly 210 miles per hour. Span-R finally catches up to the Sloshmobile and rams into the back of it. The Sloshmobile spins out and crashes into a building. Biggie Slosh gets impaled by a loose rod from the building, killing him instantly. Span-R drifts to a stop and gets out of his car, victorious after beating Biggie Slosh. Oddly, something starts blinking and beeping from Biggie Slosh's body. Span-R notices the same beeping sound from his car. He sees a magnetic bomb that must have been attached to the hood of the car when he was chasing the Sloshmobile. Span-R went to jump out of the way, but it was too late. A massive explosion detonates from his car, killing Span-R. Followed by this, numerous explosions can be seen and heard from across the island. While Biggie Slosh was in hiding, he planted bombs across the island to cause the destruction he craved so much. Biggie Slosh died, but died knowing he would be remembered. A massive statue was erected in honor of Span-R. The statue resides on the northeast corner of the island. The land was covered with damages from Biggie Slosh's explosions, but repairs quickly started to take place. During these repairs, yet another problem was occurring for the people. From all the rapid explosions and repairs the people have gone through, the energy reserves to support it all have been draining closer and closer to empty. And with no more of the purple energy crystals they used to harvest being around, any sources of energy would not have nearly the same capabilities to sustain the society. In a last-ditch effort to find a sufficient energy source, the scientists looked beyond what was around them. They found that the moon, Cyanus, had shown significant signs of material energy. The moon had always been called Cyanus from its pale cyan glow in the night sky, though upon closer recent observations, this glow is caused by the ore within the surface of the moon. This ore was called cyanium. Cyanium supposedly would provide extreme amounts of energy, more than anyone could even imagine. The energy that was contained in the ore was so incredibly strong, nobody would ever need to worry about running low on energy ever again. The scientists began Project Cyan. This project would have a spaceship fleet fully constructed and ready for takeoff within the next 2 years. These ships would be designed to carry people to Cyanus to set up a moon base for the mining and harvesting of cyanium. 2 years passed, and Project Cyan was approaching completion. The ships had been ready to launch for some time now, just some finishing details for the project remained. Randomly, the ground violently shakes, growing stronger and stronger before cutting off into silence. A moment passes before the ground below the volcano suddenly explodes. The earth rips apart as it's propelled to the sky from the powerful lava below. The eruption left the entire corner of the island decimated. The sky was smothered with ash and smog. The ground was shattered into pieces. Lava was flowing around every corner. The catastrophic destruction left the planet to be uninhabitable. Many were killed in the terrible disaster. There was no other choice but to leave the planet. The Project Cyan ships were the only last option for the people of the island to survive. The island was destroyed. All their repairs were for nothing. Loved ones were taken by the catastrophe. Everything was lost, and kept getting lost time after time. Yet the people were persistent. No matter what was thrown their way or taken from them, the urge to fight past it and to keep going was still there. With the few that survived from the catastrophe, they all quickly boarded the ships and evacuated as soon as they could. Each ship left the planet, going straight for their only other option of living, the moon. After a long journey through space, they had finally made it to the moon, Cyanus. The ships provided basic fundamentals to get their moon base started. Machines were placed to project these sort of bubbles of energy around the bases to enclose breathable air and protect the people from any harmful radiation from the outside. These fields of energy would be powered by the massive cyanium ore deposit they were located next to. It was time to start over, once again. 2 years passed. The moon base was expanding slowly yet surely. 3 locations were developed, all under their own bubble of energy and connected with tunnels. The northern location stores the laboratories for lunar investigations and operations. New developments for technology and research are all made here. The central location stores the residence halls. Everyone that made it to the moon resides within this area. The final bubble is the southern location, where all mining operations are held. This mining site is 80% revolved around cyanium excavation, but even with all the major growth happening, the morale of the people was still low. Many left homeless, waiting for homes to be constructed, creating a dilemma between prioritizing residential growth or research and developments. Though the people have a new home now, they all still hope that one day the ash-filled skies of Zephyr will part and welcome the return of Zephians once again. Being on the moon caused a considerably slower expansion than on a planet, but with time, the homeless became housed, hungry became fed, and the hopeless became hopeful. "24 years have passed. People that hope to see Zephyr again pass on. Many babies were born only knowing what life was like on Cyanus. The energy fields have expanded out, leaving more space for the people to use. The residential space, the largest energy field there is now, provides comfortable living space for all residents. The new laboratory that is located where the old residency was has been equipped with much more technology to further advance the research for the people. This allowed for the Zephians to discover a way that could solve any overpopulation that was bound to occur sometime in the near future. This solution was terraforming. The scientists were able to fertilize and convert the moon soil with a new substance, thus creating dirt sustainable for life. Grass began to grow in patches they tested within the residential sector. But the only issue was that this plant life could only thrive and spread if it was under a pressurized atmosphere, like what was within the energy fields. In order to expand the people's territory on Cyanus, There was no other choice but to create the largest energy field they will ever make to surround the colony on the moon. This energy field will spread far around the colony, projecting a massive field of energy to surround the area below to create a sustainable atmosphere for the terraforming process. The construction for the massive energy field begins, sending robots powered by cyanium to follow through with the construction. "11 more years pass, and the massive energy field has been completed. Grass slowly has begun to grow near the bases of the other energy fields. As for the people's expansion, they had traveled north to develop a second colony. This northern colony was complete with cities of its own, more terraforming facilities, more laboratories, and even parks, complete with lab-made lakes. The second colony was originally going to be constructed without the use of energy fields. However, if the massive energy field happens to suddenly shut down due to loss of power or some other unforeseen event, everyone that isn't under a field would perish. A group of scientists speculated about the condition of Zephyr. After observations of the planet, it was concluded that Zephyr would become habitable again after 45 to 50 years. When this time comes, return operations for the beloved planet can finally begin. "34 years pass for the Zephians. Huge advancements and progress has been made in this time. The grass has spread farther than ever, and the southern colony is larger than it's ever been. New energy fields were developed in the southeast, housing 2 lakes and another farming sector. In the northwest, Lake Vinor and Lake Moshes were created alongside 3 new living sectors. But an inevitable problem rose. The population was growing faster than the colonies could keep up with. Although the moon colonies were growing fast, the population was just too large for it at the time. The people desperately needed to return to Zephyr, so the scientists reevaluated their calculations for the return date for Zephyr. The results came out to be exactly 13 more years for conditions of the planet to become 100% safe for survival. The solution for the rising numbers of the population: cryogenic freezing. If cryogenic freezing chambers are constructed, half the people can wait on the moon colonies for the terraforming to finish, while the other half returns to recolonize Zephyr when it becomes habitable again. After 13 years, the time had come. The planet Zephyr was in condition to return back to. The havoc caused by the eruption of the volcano had fully subsided, allowing for life to once more thrive on the beautiful planet. The terraforming and grass spreading has been accelerating due to the new cyanium-based fertilizers. The 2 massive craters near the colonies have been transformed into 2 massive lakes, the southern one being Lake Lu and the eastern one being Lake Tels. But most importantly, the cryogenic freezing facility was complete. The time for the inevitable return to Zephyr finally had come. A massive space shuttle was constructed to transport the current 65% of the population that was returning to the planet. The remaining 35% would stay on Cyanus and be preserved within the cryogenic freezing facility. During the time that the people returning to Zephyr will spend restoring the island back to the society it once was, the cryogenically frozen population on Cyanus will wait until the entirety of the land below the massive energy field becomes fully terraformed. 84 years spent trapped on this moon. 84 years have passed since the great devastation happened on Zephyr. The time spent on the moon for the people was long and growth was slow at times, but the people kept pushing on for this moment. The moment when they could return back to the home of their ancestors. The space shuttle's engines roared as they lifted off the moon to return to the planet. The remaining population watched as the giant ship left for Zephyr. The people traveled to the cryogenic freezing facility and prepared for the freezing process. The people all rested easily as the freezing process commenced. Automatically, all systems were set to run on low power, along with the repair robots being sent out to upkeep the moon colony. The moon colony went quiet for the first time in 84 years. the space shuttle descended down to the ground of the island. The dust and sand from below whipped around the ship as the engines scorched the ground that was below it. Although almost none of them had ever seen the island in their lifetime, the place was nearly unrecognizable from what the people had seen from previous pictures and descriptions of the island. The grass that once grew everywhere was sparse, and the massive city was almost completely demolished. The island was left completely abandoned, and it was now time for the people of Cienis to bring back the thriving civilization the island once had. It was their turn to keep the fire of the Zephian legacy alight. The shuttle that descended to the planet was equipped with the essentials for bringing back a civilization. These materials would serve the basis of the new cities of Zephyr. Construction began almost right away after landing on the island. Years and years of development were ahead for the people. Determination would have to drive them through the gargantuan project, but it would be worth all the effort in the long run. "95 years later, almost an entire century of construction and developments, the island has now become a utopia once again. The cities were now improved thanks to the immense power of Cyanium. The southern city, Meridionally, is the largest and most populated city on the island, followed by its close second, Septentrionalis, located in the north. Desert cities and outposts were developed around the sandy areas of the island. These cities include Nos Arenisum in the east, Nos Ora in the northwest, and then the smaller unnamed outpost on the far western shore. Suddenly, all power flickered and shut off. Windows shattered across the cities as a massive shockwave bursted around the island. In the sky, the people saw a gargantuan mothership above them in the orbit of the planet. The ship was the size of an entire planet, yet its gravity was not affecting anything strangely. The scientists on the island went to their observatories to take a closer look and investigate what truly was happening. The mothership had entered near them through a massive red portal. The portal had dark red energy flicking around it. Just then, another being followed the mothership through the portal. His infamous purple body could be recognized by anyone who knew what history their ancestors went through. He had returned, the conqueror and god of the Treq dimension, Zeroy. Zeroy leaves the Trough dimension after eradicating the Kradons. He travels to the Treq dimension, that he now was the god of. Here, he dedicates to pursue his newfound godly rank over the dimension by conquering many worlds and making his name well known across the universe. Zeroy successfully conquers 100 worlds, enslaving the people of the worlds to generate energy for Zeroy's body, providing a virtually endless supply of power for Zeroy. Zeroy continues his search for worlds to conquer when he encounters a massive alien mothership. The ship was the size of a planet, or perhaps it was a planet. Regardless, the mothership had strange properties to it. Zeroy had detected its energy signature light years away, meaning wherever this ship's energy was coming from, it was an energy unlike he has ever seen before. Along with this, the ship seemed to have no gravitational effect on any of its surroundings, unlike what an actual planet would act like. There were two figures that ran the ship. Their names were Blagunsky and Zabumsky. Blagunsky and Zabumsky had sent off their civilizations within simulation ships to find a better world long ago. But ever since then, they have tried to save the planet of Azarkina from pollution by transforming the entire planet into one gargantuan mothership. This massive project proved successful, and Blagunsky and Zabumsky were able to rig the planet's gravitational pull to only be in effect with anything within 25 miles of it. With the mothership fully powered on phasium energy, Blagunsky and Zabumsky traveled the universe. They contacted Zeroy, informing him that they were extremely intrigued by his immense power. They offered to make Zeroy even stronger than he was, but in exchange, they needed his vowed protection over the mothership. Zeroy accepts the offer and enters the ship. He is meted by Blagunsky and Zabumsky, who introduce him to the powers of phasium. Phasium was a red crystal native to the Treq dimension. This energy source was so rich in power that even just a small amount of it could power entire planets if used efficiently. Zeroi gathers a crystal chunk of phasium, having it inserted within the chest of his body. The power instantly grew throughout his body. The energy was more than Zeroi had ever felt before. The suit Zeroi wore began to break down from the sheer amount of power. To fix this, Zeroi had his body built to harness the energy of phasium more effectively, allowing him to distribute it however he pleases throughout his body. He then travels with the mothership to all 100 planets he conquered. Here, he uses his new power of phasium to demolish each and every world. This would allow Zeroi to throw himself into battle to find what was weak about his current body and replace it. After all 100 worlds were destroyed, Zeroi had officially become the absolute strongest and most fortified version of himself that he has ever been. Zeroi appeared mostly purple still, but had red bolts of energy bursting out where the phasium crystal was originally implemented. His cape was now accented with a dark red from the power of phasium. His left hand was entirely replaced with a claw, capable of firing beams of concentrated phasium energy. Several wounds from battle still showed, but only meant that Zeroi was stronger than he ever could imagine. Blagunski and Zabumski noticed their radar detecting an anomaly on a nearby planet. It showed signs of residual interdimensional energy, something that was familiar to Zeroi. The mothership and Zeroi descend to the anomaly on the planet. There was a massive crater right where the remains of the island rested. In the center of the crater was a weak spot in the dimension's fabric suspended above the ground. Blagunski and Zabumski found an ancient crashed spaceship sunken below the water nearby. They realized that the ship was one of their simulation ships that they sent their old civilization on so long ago. If this civilization was still alive, they could only be on the other side of that interdimensional weak spot between Treq and Trough. Zeroi looked on the ground near the interdimensional weak spot. He saw something red glimmering on the dirt below. He reached down and pinched it between his fingers. It could only be one thing: phasium crystal dust. The object that traveled dimensions here left phasium dust behind as it traveled. If the old civilization here had access to phasium on this planet, what could be found on the other dimension version of this planet? If there is an alternate dimension version of everything, there must be an alternate counterpart of phasium. This counterpart to phasium could be combined with phasium to create a power source stronger than any dimension could even create. Zeroi had a new goal. The Trough version of this planet had been hiding something he should have had for centuries now. Zeroi started to rip open a portal to the Trough dimension. The mothership stayed still as it orbited Zephyr. Zeroi started to charge faster and faster towards the moon, Sionis. Zeroi crashed through the massive energy field, striking the ground of the moon. He got up slowly, looking at the moon bases around him. Zeroi seemed concerned with the presence of life on the moon. Could it be that those he made perish so long ago survived? He shook off the thought, quickly turning and walking towards the massive deposit of cyanium. His intentions became clear now. He had come for this dimension's cyanium, and lots of it too. Zeroi reached the cyanium ore and instantly started ravaging and harvesting chunks of it. Zeroi seemed entranced by the cyanium, like he had been craving its power for centuries. The ground shook. Zeroi looked around, holding chunks of cyanium in each hand still. Abruptly, a being bursted through the ground below Zeroi, smashing his face with his fist as he flew up out of the ground. Zeroi was knocked off his feet for a moment, but he swiftly recovered. The being stood in front of Zeroi, standing at the same height and size as him. The being was known as Cielecki, god of the Trough dimension and guardian of cyanium. Cielecki was livid at Zeroi. Why would he travel to this dimension just to take cyanium for himself? Cielecki had been protecting and keeping the power of cyanium from falling into the wrong hands, but never once has he ever had to deal with another god infiltrating his dimension to take cyanium. Whatever Zeroi's purpose for taking cyanium was, it could not be good. Cielecki charges at Zeroi as he stands his ground. The two gods clash against one another for a few moments before Cielecki swoops down to grab Zeroi's leg, launching him straight off the moon and towards the planet. Zeroi crashes right on the island of Zephyr. The immense phasium energy within him, paired with a brutal impact on the island, caused the surrounding environment to be scarred with the energy dispersed from the impact. He crawled up to see that the very land he had awoken on was where he was returned to. But there were cities across every bit of the island. He had failed in fulfilling Leroy's dying wish to extinct the Zephians. Zeroy was infuriated, but then soon enough, Cielecki followed. He crashed on the other side of the island, causing that area to be scarred from the energy of Cyanium. 3 larger chunks of the moon were brought down with him after the battle on the moon. The 2 gods had begun their battle against each other. One side of the island was corrupted with cyanium crystals. The other was corrupted with the Treq dimensional counterpart of it, phasium. The northern dunes were now completely taken over by Cielecki's cyanium energy, while the eastern plains were entirely devoured by phasium energy from Zeroy. Cielecki knows he's against someone extremely powerful, but cannot let any more lies fall into the hands of Zeroy. If Zeroy got a hold of cyanium, it could be the end of the Trough universe as we know it. Zeroy charges at Cielecki, immediately clashing against him and punching haphazardly. Each punch was stronger than the last, and all were without much of a struggle for him. Cielecki sent out a shockwave of cyanium energy, knocking Zeroy down. Cielecki jumps into the air, only to come slamming down on Zeroy with a powerful kick. Zeroy throws Cielecki off of him, sending him flying towards the city. Cielecki quickly redirects and charges right back at Zeroy, punching him deep into the ground. Zeroy was shocked by Cielecki's power. It was completely unlike anyone he's ever faced before, but he was still determined to make quick work out of him. Cielecki was struggling to keep the fight in the north away from the people as they evacuated to the bunkers. But soon enough, everyone had fully evacuated. It was time to show Zeroy his all. Zeroy bursted out of the ground, flying just across from Cielecki. A moment passed before Zeroy charged straight towards Cielecki again. Cielecki found Zeroy to be predictable in his movements. He would charge at him with a punch and attempt to slam him into the ground afterwards. Cielecki easily dodged the punch Zeroy threw, grabbed his arm, and then flung him into the ground. Zeroy laid on the ground for a few seconds. Cielecki waited. Suddenly, Zeroy launched back up towards Cielecki. Cielecki prepared to dodge out of his punch when Zeroy whizzed past him. Zeroy had not been charging at Cielecki to punch him, but rather to fly above him. Cielecki was thrown off. Was Zeroy being purposely predictable earlier just to trick him at this moment? Zeroy raised his left arm and aimed it at Cielecki. A blast of solid phasium energy catapulted out of the cannon in his arm. Cielecki was now the one being pummeled into the ground. The blast kept incinerating his body until it finally went out. Cielecki was laying in the crater, slowly looking up to see Zeroy floating above him. Cielecki had to get up and keep fighting. The fate of the whole dimension rested in his hands. The two battled on the island for days. Cielecki would charge his punches with cyanium while Zeroy would blast beams of phasium energy. The island was decimated. Cielecki was getting weaker by the moment. Zeroy was still moving strong. Cielecki charges towards Zeroy once again. Zeroy stands there while Cielecki throws punches after punches. Zeroy was hurting, but he knew Cielecki was in much more pain than him. Cielecki's punches grew slower and slower until he stopped. Zeroy reached in to grab Cielecki to finish the job. But Cielecki quickly dodged out of the way, instantly charging his fist with immense levels of cyanium energy before punching Zeroy in his back. Cielecki was in pain, but he could keep going for days, weeks, maybe even months. Zeroy was thrashed into the ground. Cielecki stood tall. Zeroy was buried under. A beam of phasium energy burned through the ground that Zeroy is under. He flew out of the hole, covered in blemishes. Cielecki bolted towards Zeroy, but Zeroy flew towards him as well. An echoing boom was heard for miles. Cielecki gasped, but no air could be breathed in. Zeroy's arm was punched straight through Cielecki's chest. Zeroy slowly lowered his arm, and Cielecki slowly slid off of it, falling onto the ground below. The blue light that shined in his skin faded fast. Zeroy looked down at the old god of the Trough dimension, and then headed for the now demolished cities. Zeroy had completely taken over the island, along with claiming the title as the new god of the Treq and Trough dimensions. Every survivor there was, whether on the island or inside the bunkers, perished at the hands of Zeroi. The only Zephians that survived this disaster were the ones that chose to be cryogenically frozen on the moon, Sionis. He vowed to eradicate all lives of Kraton and Zephian kind, just as Leroy had wished for. Zeroi flew up and headed for the moon once more. Now that the Guardian of Cyanium was out of the way, nothing stood between Zeroi and the Cyanium he could harvest. Zeroi would finally create the ultimate power source for his body, becoming truly unstoppable. Zeroi was still furious over the fact that Zephian life survived from what he had put them through. All of that just for them to come back. He could not be satisfied with a mere extinction of their species this time. This time, Zeroi planned a new fate for the Zephian kind. The cryogenic freezing chambers slowly wake the people up. The emergency defreezing process was initiated due to some unforeseen destruction to the moon base. As the people crawl out of their cryo chambers, looking around to see what had happened, multiple atmosphere bubbles were completely destroyed, rendering them inactive along with the many destroyed cryogenic chambers. Red lines were smoldering within the ground, being left behind from the battle between Zeroi and Cielecki. But the most devastating of all was the massive crater that resided right in the middle of the moon base. The people were dazed and confused over what had happened. Regardless, something bad was happening. The scientists rushed over to their observatories to view what was happening back on Zephyr. The island they sent their people to was completely decimated. But what tragedy could have happened to cause all of this? A small, red gleam of light appeared above the moon base. It grew larger and larger until eventually crashed down on the surface of Sionis. It was Zeroi. Instantly, Zeroi began to fly up, shooting lasers from his arm, destroying everything he laid his eyes on. 3 massive space shuttles appeared above the moon bases, abducting any survivors that attempted to run away. Zeroi wanted to make up for his mistake of letting the species survive, so he began to enact his plan for the fate of Zephian kind. If this species wanted to survive so badly, then he would let them. Zeroi would exterminate a massive majority of the species, while capturing the rest that attempt to run away. These captured people would be transported to a location on the mothership where they would live in constant torture. Zeroi continued its destruction until there was nothing left from the moon base. If the Zephians weren't dead at the hands of Zeroi, then they were seized by the shuttles of the mothership. The moon base rested in shambles as a shell of what it used to be. The ships flew back towards the mothership. It was the last time Zephians would ever see their home again. Zeroi finally initiated his cyanium extraction process, becoming one step closer to the ultimate creation of zeronium, the combination between cyanium and phasium. Cyanium extractors were deployed near the massive deposit of cyanium next to the obliterated moon base. Cyborg-like creatures called phasons resided on the mothership. Oddly enough, they looked very similar to the Zephians, just much more technologically advanced and ran off phasium. Phasons would be the ones performing all the torture onto the Zephians. The abducting shuttles land on the mothership's surface. The people started to get escorted out onto the island that they would be tortured on. This was their fate now. They looked around the island. It was covered in futuristic buildings, but almost none of these buildings seemed to be unlocked to the public. For all the Zephians knew, the buildings didn't even have people in them. Once all the people exited the ships, they lifted off to leave. The ground began to shake, growing more and more vicious every moment. An explosion occurred across the island, shooting liquid phasium into the air. This was the first of many phases of torture planned. The island flooded in several areas. Geysers of phasium bursted out from the ground. The phasium practically dissolved the flesh of the people it came in contact with. Everyone ran for cover and shelter from the disaster. In every disaster would come hope for the people, yet this time there was absolutely none. The torture would continue on as the people would continue fighting to survive. Was it even worth the fight if there was no light at the end of the tunnel? Or was the primitive instinct to take cover the only thing keeping the species alive? Suddenly, after days of torment, the island shook. This time, however, it was more subtle of a shake. The phasium ruins across the island started to glow. The shaking slowed to a stop. All survivors on the island suddenly opened their eyes, as if the disaster of phasium geysers was merely a dream. They looked around to see the island return to its original state. All cities were completely reset and back to the pristine state as they once were. But the people knew it was not a dream. Everyone they saw perish was still gone. The phasium geysers really did happen, but the island was somehow reset. The immensely advanced technology of the phasons was beyond comprehension for the Zephians. The island would reset between every phase of torture. The people were relieved for the break of torture, but then came the next phase within minutes of the island resetting. Randomly, around the island spawned small floating bubbles. Each one was different in color from the last, but within seconds, they rapidly expanded, devouring the land within them. The island was scattered with these bubbles of distortion. Once entered in a bubble, one's senses of reality and perception of existence completely distorts. Screams of terror can be heard throughout the island. The distortion wouldn't physically alter anything, but would crumble one's mind faster than imaginable. The experience was indescribable, yet so horrible it would lead to more deaths than the last phase of torture. After gathering over 100 tons of both cyanium and phasium, Zeroi was finally ready to create the ultimate power source. The fusing process required an immense amount of both materials to ensure enough energy was present between both of them to fully fuse. Although there was over 200 pounds of material to only create roughly 5 pounds of zeronium, those 5 pounds would contain more energy than any material ever could from any single dimension. The fusion commenced. Red and blue flashed from the fusion chambers that held the phasium and cyanium. The lights flickered away abruptly. The piles of phasium and cyanium were completely drained of energy, but residing between the two was a purple, cube-like material. Zeroi had finally made zeronium. An entirely new body was constructed for Zeroi. This body was similar to his current one, but was gray and constructed strong enough to contain the power of zeronium. Zeroi was transferred to his new body, and the zeronium was carefully transported from the fusion chamber to the body. Instantly, the zeronium's power cracked across Zeroi's new body. Zeroi stood up, feeling stronger than he had ever felt before through his entire existence. The island rumbled slightly, and the ruins began to glow. The people woke up, seeing the island to be completely reset once again. This time, though, the people were fearful of what stood next. Fear and anticipation filled the minds of the Zephians. Nothing happened. Hours passed, and yet there was no torture, not even a single sign of anything. The island was eerily empty of screams and agony. Something had to be wrong. Why would the torture suddenly stop? The people became more anxious by the minute. Suddenly, the people looked up into the sky. A massive portal ripped through the space-time fabric by the mothership. Blagunsky and Zabumsky panicked on the bridge of the mothership. Something far more vital was at hand than running torture or anything else. Zeroi's heart sank, for he had never seen any other being travel through dimensions other than him. Something bad was about to happen. A colossal hand reached out of the portal, followed by 3 other hands of the same gargantuan size. The being pulled itself through the portal. It was at least 15 times the size of the island. The entity consisted of a large, rhombus-like body with 2 eyes stacked vertically on it. Floating around this body were 4 massive arms. It was Daimo, the god of gods. For every universe, there is a god to overlook it. But for every god, who is there to overlook them? Daimo was known as a second-tier god. First-tier gods overlooked their universes, while second-tier gods overlooked their gods. Daimo had strange properties about him. Time and space were seemingly irrelevant to him, like he existed in a realm beyond space-time. Daimo is at the pinnacle of existence, existing everywhere at every time, but nowhere at any time. Obviously, this state of being is far past conception for mortals. Daimo uttered his words through the thoughts in Blagunski, Zabumski, and Zeroy's minds. Your existence must be wiped. The one deemed Zeroy has become interdimensionally forbidden due to the material within his being. Zeronium should never exist, as it is composed of two of the strongest materials out of their independent dimensions. This composition of being puts the fate of all destiny at risk. Everyone goes quiet. Suddenly, Daimo charges his enormous fist towards the mothership. The ship breaks down, sirens blared across the surface. Blagunski and Zabumski initiate their counterattacks against Daimo. But out of their millennia of existence, neither of them have ever been so fearful for their lives. Rockets and nukes fire towards Daimo, but seem to barely scratch against him. Daimo swipes his hand at the mothership once more, destroying part of it and disabling many systems of the mothership. Many sections of the mothership commence their emergency escape systems. The island of torture the surviving Zephians were on started to rise slowly. Smoke blasted from below the island as it lifted off into the sky. The rivers of liquid phasium poured dry out of the ends. The massive phasium repository in the center of the island deployed an island-wide energy field to hold an atmosphere as it reached into space. Hundreds of other islands launched off, but many were destroyed by debris or even Daimo himself. Eventually, the Torture Island had now been the sole savior of the Zephian race, all thanks to the automated escape system. With one final blow, Daimo completely shattered the mothership. Before Blagunski and Zabumski could escape, Daimo precisely caught them between his massive fingers and crushed them instantly. The island now floated in space. Some parts were damaged in the escape process, but the majority survived. The people looked around them. Debris from the mothership surrounded them in every direction. All they could do now was to try to quietly escape. The island would automatically search for the nearest habitable location. The island suddenly heads straight for one of Daimo's arms. The system had become damaged from the escape process, thus misinterpreting the massive arm as a place to land. The people could not change the course of the island, no matter what they did. Daimo looked over, seeing his main target, Zeroy. He watched the purple gleam of Zeronium in Zeroy's chest grow larger as he approached him. Zeroy was right in front of Daimo. Zeroy, the god of Treq and Trough, against Daimo, the god of all gods. Daimo could not let Zeroy escape alive. Someone with the destructive and power-hungry mind of Zeroy becoming a second-tier god would mean the end of all reality. The fight between the two forces began. The island headed uncontrollably towards Daimo's arm. Everyone braced for the impact. The energy field was still intact, but the island was broken to pieces. Many Zephians managed to survive the crash, but were now completely deserted on the surface of Daimo's arm. The only chance of hope for the people was to construct escape shuttles out of the materials from the crashed island. The Zephian race could be saved if they managed to escape just once more, even if the odds were slim. Daimo and Zeroy clashed. The massive size of Daimo gave him protection, but Zeroy's newfound Zeronium strength may be the sole factor for his survival. Zeroy relentlessly struck Daimo, zipping around to dodge every blow Daimo tried to make. But each of the strikes Zeroy made to Daimo barely made a dent to him. Zeroy has not been worried about losing a fight in a long time, but this fight was truly terrifying to him. He had always heard rumors of second-tier gods existing, but never saw any evidence for their existence. Apparently, there were only so many dimensions that these second-tier gods had control over. although this exact number is unknown. Daimo would rarely land a punch on Zeroy, but when he did, it was absolutely devastating for Zeroy. Zeroy would become disoriented, leaving him vulnerable for even more hits against him. He suspected that he could only go through so many of Daimo's strikes before he would perish, even with his Zeronium abilities. But with enough hits from Zeroy, Daimo would slowly but surely weaken. A matter of time would be the decider of the two's fate. Almost 2 long years of fighting went on between Daimo and Zeroy. Daimo had many chunks cracked from his body. Zeroy's body was heavily dented. Neither of the both had ever been this weak and injured before, but their motives upheld them enough to continue fighting. Daimo fought for the sake of his position over all his dimensions, something he had strived so hard to attain. Zeroy fought so that the centuries of effort he put in would not go to waste. The both were debilitated, but the fortitude of their minds sustained them. The ruins of the island on Daimo's arm were partially recycled to construct small cities for the Zephians to live in. Not only this, but the materials harvested from the crashed pieces of the island also allowed for the people to start construction on escape shuttles. The hope for a better life afar filled the people with determination. They only needed a little longer to finish construction of the shuttles. Suddenly, Daimo becomes infuriated. For almost 2 years straight, the two had been fighting non-stop. Daimo began to go all out against Zeroy. Zeroy was too weak to dodge every strike, only being able to avoid roughly half of the blows. Daimo kept attacking, throwing punches faster and faster. Zeroy couldn't keep up against Daimo. Zeroy's armor cracked so much that it would chip off in places. Zeroy was exhausted. Daimo was throwing the strongest and fastest punch yet, right at Zeroy. Suddenly, Zeroy charged his punch with the Zeronium energy within him and struck back at Daimo's fist. Zeroy's robotic hand he struck with was completely obliterated from the attack, but as a result, Daimo's fist was completely shattered. The damage cracked down the rest of Daimo's arm. Daimo's eyes widened with shock. Zeroy charged up the stump of his missing hand with Zeronium energy, blasting uncontrolled beams of energy at Daimo. Daimo was going to die. Without a doubt in his mind, he knew if he wanted to live, he would have to run. Although Zeroy was almost as damaged as him, he was dead set on winning this fight. Daimo quickly began to rip open a portal to a different dimension, rushing into it before Zeroy could follow him. Zeroy notices Daimo's attempt to escape and charges straight towards him. A blinding flash appears. Daimo had made it. Daimo successfully transported himself to a dimension away from Zeroy. He looked around for Zeroy, yet there was no trace of him. Zeroy was just a mere second too late to catch Daimo. The people look at the island from this dimension. Since the mothership was built to travel interdimensionally when required, many of the ship's systems were integrated with interdimensional indicator databases. These would depict the name, relative date, general history, and, if known, fate for the dimension it was within. This current dimension was known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 2, Part 3 of Aftertreq. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the volcano that devastated the island never transferred over during Crimson's dimension shift. This meant that there was no need to evacuate to the moon, and that society could continue to expand and advance. In this dimension, the infamous Biggie Slosh had children. One of Biggie Slosh's descendants was a man known as Lil Slog. Lil Slog took up after his ancestors, living a life very similar to how Biggie Slosh did. He would drive around in the Slogmobile, which was based on a model that was passed down in the Slosh bloodline. However, just like his ancestors, Lil Slog would get into trouble. During this era, new models of the Span R were developed as a result of Biggie Slosh defeating the original one. These newer generations were deemed Span Ms. standing for Super Preeminent Artificial Non-Organic Machine. Each of these machines had their own vehicle to counter crime in the cities. These were called the Rookies, and were designed to outperform most vehicles on the island. Lil Slog challenged this idea by escaping Span M's many times with his Slogmobile. However, even with the presence of Lil Slog, crime was not any more prevalent than it had always been. A portal rips open. A gray arm reaches out from the other side. Zeroy had finally found the dimension that Daimo was hiding in. Daimo hesitates out of fear, but shakes off the feeling. He throws a punch towards Zeroy, but he dodges it. Zeroy was furious. Daimo was truly terrified. He turned to attempt to escape again through another portal. Zeroy was quicker this time and chased after Daimo. But Zeroy still wasn't quick enough. Daimo had done it again. He escaped Zeroy once more. The current dimension is known as the Troz dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 2, Part 2 of Troth. This dimension shows what would have resulted if John Carter's death ray had failed, and that the Zaders successfully took over the island. In this dimension, the Zaders appear to be dark blue in color. All life was demolished from the island, and in its place were the Zaders. Due to their large influence and power, the Zaders could not find much other use for the island other than a place to establish a few outposts. Daimo knew where this was going. Zeroy was relentless and would not stop until he killed him. If only Zeroy understood the true extent of what he was trying to accomplish. Suddenly, another portal rips open again. Zeroy crawls out of it aggressively, immediately charging for Daimo. Zeroy attacks, but doesn't hit anything. Daimo was already gone. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 3, Part 10 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have happened if Leroy won the fight against Voldir. The people noticed something odd about this dimension. The interdimensional indicator detected the presence of two gods in this dimension within the recent past. One of them came from the Treq dimension, while the other one perished to the wrath of Carminium Leroy. According to the relative time of the year that Daimo traveled to, though, this god from the Treq universe must have been the god from centuries ago. In this dimension, Leroy absorbed the power of the Treq dimension's version of the Scarlet Pyramid, the Carminium Pyramid. This new power allowed him to defeat Voldir with ease, followed by the destruction of the rest of the island and its inhabitants. Daimo knew that Zeroy would be more prepared to fight back with every time he tried to escape. He knew that he couldn't keep getting lucky with these escapes. He would have to fight back at some point. Daimo looked down at himself. He was absolutely not in the condition to fight at this moment. He just needed a little more time. Suddenly, a rip in the space started to form once more. Zeroy finally found where Daimo was. Daimo searched, locating Carminium Leroy on the surface of the island he took over. Now that he was the god of the Treq dimension from killing the previous one, he could be strong enough to hold off Zeroy for just a moment longer. Daimo communicates through Carminium Leroy's thoughts. I am Daimo, god of gods. You are ordered to fight the being emerging out of this portal to your death. Failure to obey this order will result in your death regardless. An inevitable demise awaits you, but fret not, your death will not go in vain. Zeroy bursted out of the portal, noticing Daimo attempting to escape once more through his own tear in space. Zeroy charges towards Daimo, when abruptly, out of the corner of his eye, Carminium Leroy charges at him for a sneak attack. Zeroy dodges the attack swiftly, and instantly punches straight through Carminium Leroy's chest. Zeroy quickly turned back towards Daimo and continued charging at him. He lifted his fist at Daimo, but missed. Although this one attack towards Zeroy wasted only a mere second, it caused Zeroy to be just a mere second too late. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 5, Part 1 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the dimension shifting process of the island from Treq to the island of Trough was a failure. In this dimension, a similar island to the one from the Treq dimension was shifted within a similar island to the Trough dimension, rather than from the sky above the island. This resulted in the two islands fusing together, causing mass destruction and suffocation to the people of Treq. A major casualty from this miscalculation includes the suffocation of the Treq Zeroi. This is due to the island fusing within the ground where this Zeroi rested. Without a Zeroi to fulfill any previous duties or to cause destruction to the land, the island remains fairly peaceful. Although many were killed from this failed shifting process, those that survived did not have to worry about any other dangerous forces. Zeroi opens a portal to the Treq dimension, but as he enters through it, one of Daimo's gigantic hands grabs hold of him immediately. Daimo noticed Zeroi was finding him faster and faster with every time he escaped. He had to weaken Zeroi just a little more. As Zeroi broke away at the fingers clenched around him, Daimo began to open another portal. The portal opened up. Daimo looked down at his hand, tightly holding Zeroi. He noticed a gleam of purple light shining through the cracks between his fingers. Suddenly, Daimo knew what Zeroi was trying to do. In one swift moment, Daimo raises his other arm and strikes down on the arm holding Zeroi, brutally slicing it off. The hand would only hold Zeroi for so much longer. Daimo quickly escaped through his portal. Zeroi blasted his way out of the grasp of Daimo's severed hand. His condition was far worse than before, with even more cracks from the heavy pressure of Daimo's grip. The current dimension is known as the Trom dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 1, Part 3 of Trough. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the brain chips implanted by the Xandromanians into the infection to control them as infection beasts went haywire. In the war of the Xandromano against Tarragon, the effort to convert infection into controllable weapons on the battlefield was higher than ever. Though, this process was rushed, leaving the artificial intelligence that was implanted inside the infection to become too sentient. This was due to the combination of the artificial intelligence and the infection's natural instinct to kill and spread. Although the infection successfully defeated Tarragon, it also turned on Xandromano, killing them as well. Eventually, the infection became a sort of hive mind entity, killing all living creatures and beings on the island and taking over the place for itself. After many years, the infection becomes one with the island. All life that managed to exist and survive was now corrupted with infection, forcibly living symbiotically with it. Now left with only two hands, Daimo felt his demise was approaching. Fighting back may damage Zeroi, but ends up damaging himself more. Daimo had no other option but to be cursed to forever escape Zeroi until the end of time. Daimo opened the portal to the next dimension he would escape to, and waited. After some time, Zeroi's portal began to open. Daimo escaped once more. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 1, Part 1 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have resulted if Zaboomski and Blagoonsky never existed. They were the very reason for why everything happened the way it did in the Treq dimension. The island was void of intelligent life. The place that was there from the beginning, completely empty. It was smothered with trees and greenery. The place seemed to be so peaceful without inhabitants. Was the real cause of all destruction this whole time the people themselves? Or was all the destruction and despair out of the control of the people? It was driving him mad. Daimo could not escape Zeroi for much longer, let alone for the rest of time. He knew that Zeroi would never stop chasing after him because of his indomitable drive. Zeroi suddenly started to open his portal again, but this time, Daimo had a thought. What if he just didn't escape? What if he just admitted his defeat and let Zeroi take his life? Daimo hesitated, but turned and opened a portal to escape once more. The current dimension is known as the Trad dimension. The moon is similar to Cyanus. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the Leroy that caused the dimension shift never existed. This allowed for the mansion people of Trad to successfully reach the moon and harvest the energy-rich resources from it. The moon was named Citrinus due to the plentiful amount of citrinium located on and within its surface. Citrinium, which is comparable to cyanium from the Trough dimension, is the most powerful resource in the dimension of Trad. Leader of the mansion people in Trad, John Carter, ruled the civilization created on the moon. This civilization was developed with immense energy of citrinium harvested by the central power plant on top of the large citrinium deposit. The civilization rapidly expanded, constructing a massive energy shield around their base for extra protection, along with the additional energy fields protecting every location on the moon. Although John Carter succeeded in controlling the power of citrinium, he wanted more. But with his ever-growing age, John would eventually reach an ending point to his life. John decided to shed his weak flesh and to rebirth into something stronger and unaging. An artificially created organism was developed to be capable of withholding the incredible power of citrinium by having it flow through its veins. This laboratory-born creature would be the vessel of John Carter's mind, allowing him to surpass his old limitations and to ascend into something superior. John transfers his mind and conscience into the creature. John's old body is left to die as his new self awakens. John could no longer be seen as himself. Rather, he was known as Daimo, the Citrinium Abomination. Almost instantly after the creation of Daimo, the ground of the moon shook. A being bursted out from beneath the ground. They were known as Amberon, god of the Trad dimension and guardian of Citrinium. Amberon fought against Daimo to stop him from getting any stronger, but it may have already been too late. Even with his creation happening not too long before, Daimo was already extremely powerful because of the citrinium in his veins. The fight between the two lasted a while, but eventually came to an end with Daimo victorious. After Daimo became god of the Trad dimension, he felt what it was like to be truly above those around him. No longer was he the same species or divine status his people were. He was so much more than anything and everything. Daimo went on a rampage to become stronger and more powerful. He followed this bloody road and never looked back. The moon civilization on Centrinius eventually established a new leader in the place of John Carter. The people of the moon base continued to expand, but were losing hope after being abandoned by John Carter. As soon as he became Daimo, it was thought as if all that John did for his people was so that he could attain more power for himself. It had been roughly a decade since the death of Amberon and Daimo's abandonment of the civilization. Since they would not be welcomed, returning to the planet below them was no longer an option. The people had no other choice but to accept their lives the way it was. Why did he do it? Why did Daimo keep escaping, knowing well that his life would either be brought to a quick end by the wrath of Zeroi or prolonged to an endless life of torture and unending escape from Zeroi? But yet, Daimo kept striving to live on. Why? Daimo looked at the moon in the Trad dimension, his home dimension. If only he could tell himself back then to never strive to become as divine as he is now. If only his younger self knew the terrible end that awaited him if he kept following the path he was going down. Through all the deaths and destruction he put others through, and for what? A spot on the divine hierarchy that would just be taken by the next being that thirsted for his blood. Daimo began to cry, something he hadn't done since becoming a god. For the first time in his invaluable existence, he felt worthless. A portal began to open. Zeroi slowly floated out of it. Daimo looked over at Zeroi. Zeroi glanced back. Zeroi charged directly at Daimo. Daimo swung one of his massive arms back at Zeroi. Daimo, himself, no longer understood why he was fighting anymore. Zeroi sluggishly dodged the attack. They were both exhausted by the virtually endless battle between them. Zeroy used up tons of his diminishing energy and went in to attack Daimo. The punch against Daimo's massive arm shattered it. Chunks of the arm flew haphazardly around Daimo and Zeroy. The Zephians residing on one of Daimo's arms still survived, but with the destruction Zeroy was causing, it could be the end of their existence. Daimo looked down at his being. He had a nub of an arm left after Zeroy's attack, along with two deeply fissured arms with their hands demolished, and one last surviving arm that was in no better condition than the rest of them. Zeroy was on the verge of death, his whole body fractured and falling apart in pieces, along with his robotic hand completely destroyed. The two stared at each other, withholding from any combat for the first time in 2 years. Zeroy broke open the containment in his chest, revealing the zeronium crystal inside. It began to glow brighter and brighter. He made no attempt to mask what he was about to do. Zeroy planned to completely sacrifice his body and the zeronium crystal to fire a beam of energy so powerful it would obliterate Daimo in one swift blow. This was the moment he would have to decide: escape and continue this torture, or perish and let Zeroy steal the spot on the divine throne from him. Daimo reached his shaky arm out to open a portal to escape, but hesitated. He looked back down at the moon civilization. The zeronium crystal vaporized into a massive energy blast directed straight towards Daimo. The beam of energy pierced through the god. Zeroy woke up in a field of grass, the wind gently tilting the blades of grass as it gusted by. He slowly sat up straight, looking down at himself. He was different, not just physically, but his state of existence felt different. His body warped the laws of physics in its own construct. His body, shattered, yet still in complete control of every fragment. His limbs floating, his eyes vacant. Zeroy no longer was bound to the chains of space-time. His existence spread through every possibility, and yet none of them. Time was not something he could run out of anymore. Zeroy was the new pinnacle of existence. The Zephians woke up across this new island. The island had a temperate forest in the southwest, pines in the southeast, mountains in the northeast, and open plains in the northwest. In utter confusion with what happened, the people had no other choice but to begin constructing homes. Across this new island, small colonies developed, housing small populations of the survivors from the past. Suddenly, a group of people ran from the north. They screamed in fear. They were not alone. Zeroy was on the island with them. The people prepared to fight back against Zeroy. It was rumored that he was simply sitting on the edge of the cliff in the north, watching the sun rise and set, analyzing the phases of the moon as they cycle. He must be waiting for the perfect moment to finally exterminate the Zephian race, just as he promised Leroy so long ago. The people gathered their weapons and charged into battle against Zeroy, although it seemed there was not a single soul that believed they could win. But if they were going to become extinct at the wrath of Zeroy, they might as well die fighting for their survival. Eventually, the people passed through the distant plains to reach Zeroy. Just as suspected, he was simply sitting and staring. The first person charged towards him, screaming as tears poured down his face. Zeroy slowly stood up, turning around and instantly killing the man. His body was crushed into the ground by Zeroy's floating fist. He stared at the crater he made in the ground. Slowly yet surely, more and more people charged towards Zeroy, giving their lives towards the impossible odds that they would win the war. But with each and every person that tried to attack Zeroy, they would get brutally killed before even getting remotely close to landing an attack. Every skull crushed and every body decimated was completely effortless to Zeroy. Nonetheless, the people refused to give up fighting. Person after person, they closed in on Zeroy, only to get killed. It was pointless. Person after person, bodies piled. meaningless deaths for an impossible cause. Eventually, with their numbers whittling away, they stopped. People stopped charging towards Zeroi. Zeroi looked around him, seeing all the dead that surrounded. He looked towards the group of people in front of him. The group of people stared back. It was completely silent. Zeroi turned and walked back over to the cliff, sitting down and watching the horizon once again. The people would be the ones to make themselves extinct if they continued fighting, so they slowly backed away to return back home. There was no struggle for him anymore. His fighting was meaningless. With nothing to strive for, what would be the point for fighting back? Without a struggle, there is no purpose. "136 long years of expansion. Towns and cities sprouted from the seeds that were the colonies, covering the majority of the southern parts of the island. Civilization grew larger, yet never grew any closer towards Zeroi. Though he never threw the first punch, the fear that he would still lingered in the hearts of the people. A mission was developed for the island's military to investigate Zeroi. The team of soldiers traveled through the northern plains, eventually reaching Zeroi's cliff. They notice he has not moved at all, simply sitting, thinking, and watching the horizon. There was not much else to document, and interacting with Zeroi would never result in anything beneficial. Besides, enough meaningless deaths were already spent for the Zephians throughout their history. "313 years passed by. The knowledge and technologies of the Zephians grew exponentially. The towns turned into cities, as cities turned into megacities. The era of urbanization was upon the Zephians. The knowledge of one such technology was passed down by the Zephian ancestors. This device supposedly was accessed by the ancient Zephians to locate their dimension and describe it, including depictions of the realm and the name given to it. This interdimensional indicator was reinvented. Along with it came another device capable of traveling through dimensions. This concept was never before seen to any of the current Zephians, but used to be a key component of their ancestors' history. The interdimensional indicator was activated. The device read out information of their current dimension. Arono. The dimension's name was Arono. Arono's history dates back indefinitely, even before the Zephians arrived. And all throughout this endless history, Zeroi was there through its entirety as his ascended form. It was true, Zeroi truly existed across all of space and time. Neither of these concepts bound Zeroi in any way. Scientists began to work with information from Zephian history before arriving on Arono. Their conclusion? It all is Zeroi. Zeroi is the zenith of all existence. When he killed the previous god of gods, Daimo, it was all reset. All realms controlled by Daimo were reset entirely to conform to the existence of Zeroi. Zeroi becoming the new god of gods was why Arono and all other dimensions under his control came into existence. Paired with this interdimensional indicator was the device that could save their society from the overarching threat of Zeroi. Though he has proven to be dormant, nothing would be safer than completely abandoning the Arono dimension for another, safer one. However, a dilemma arose with the newfound realization of Zeroi's existence. Even if they could escape to another dimension, they would never escape the ascendancy of Zeroi. Zeroi existed across every dimension, yet also didn't. The concept was hard to grasp, but meant that the people could ultimately never fully escape Zeroi. But this wasn't enough of a reason to not escape Arono. The interdimensional traveling device was powered on, set to a neighboring universe, and activated. But nothing happened. Zeroi entirely erased the power of interdimensional travel, isolating all dimensions he controls from each other. Interdimensional travel has become a concept of the past. Zeroi was trapping them, but why? He has proven that killing the Zephians is not in his favor. Why would he cause this? But maybe this wasn't just about the Zephians. Maybe this wasn't about trapping them. but rather freeing them from falling down the same horrid path Zeroi went down. A path stained with blood and regrets, ultimately originating with interdimensional travel. Zeroi truly did feel remorse. "84 years have passed. Zeroi sits on the cliff, the grass growing around him with time. He doesn't move for years. Silently, the Zephian species passes, as does the extensive history and stories behind them, never to be told to any descendant again. The reason why was unknown to Zeroi, but it seemed as if Zeroi already knew it was coming to them. He lays down to stare off into the ever-changing sky above him. The ruins of Zephian civilization began their descent back into the ground. Vines desperately grab onto the buildings, pulling them back towards the ground once again. The buildings did not fight back against this change. With nothing there to stop them, the concrete jungles and metallic superstructures finally were free to become one with the world it was torn away from. The city was finally being destroyed by one not of evil, but of peaceful change. Zeroi sits upright again. A tear rolls down his vacant face. Silence, utter silence, as it has been for the past nearly 5,000 years. The Zephian race becomes forgotten as the evidence of their existence fades away. The civilization has completely returned to the dirt it was built upon. Despite it all, Zeroi still sat and stared. The horizon was ever-changing, even after nearly 5,000 years. As with Zeroi's thoughts, they were static, never changing once. Zeroi only thought of one thing: himself. He had almost forgotten all about his divine state until recently, for all that filled his mind was the regret of his life. He has accomplished everything he could have ever wished for, yet he felt more empty than he has ever felt. Voldir, the god of Treq before him, the first god killed by his desire for power. Was his death worth it? Whether Voldir lived or died didn't matter to Zeroi, but it did for the Cradons he served. In that moment, Zeroi chose to kill Voldir. He chose to become more powerful. But why? Why did he want power if it would have just resulted in this? Zeroi thought more to himself. Becoming powerful meant everything to him. He took away things that mattered most from countless civilizations for his own benefit. Entire worlds were shattered in order for Zeroi to reach the pinnacle of existence he desired so much. It was all for power. Power that would allow him to see what it is truly like to have an absolutely pointless existence. To torture others in order to give himself the worst torture imaginable. It struck him. Zeroi wanted to become the most powerful being because it made him feel strong. But it wasn't the strength that made him feel content. It was the struggle for it. The struggle to achieve more is what made him feel so alive, like he had a purpose. Zeroi now understood what it was like to be undefeatable and all-controlling. He had no struggle anymore, no way to become more powerful, and thus no purpose. Another tear fell from his empty eye. Zeroi asked himself the same question once more. Voldir, the god of Treq before him. The murder that began Zeroi's horrible journey to become the most powerful being. Was his death worth it? Was taking the life of one loved by so many worth it to attain the immense power Zeroi held now? He looked down at his hands, sobbing silently. The tears rolled down his face, one by one falling onto his palms. He angrily clenched his fist, smashing it into the ground beside him. The grip of his hand slowly loosened as more tears kept falling down. He could do absolutely anything, but nothing could ever cleanse the regrets of his life.